This is the CBS Evening News. Connie Chung sitting in for Dan Rather. Good evening. Oliver North will not go to prison for his role in the Iran-Contra scandal. A federal judge sentenced North to a 3-year suspended prison sentence today and put him on 2 years probation. He was ordered to devote 1,200 hours to community service, to work at an inner-city drug program, and he was fined $150,000. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver has more.
Are you expecting a jail soon?
If there's a firing squad.
Oliver North, tense and subdued, appeared prepared for the worst, facing a possible 10 years in jail and $750,000 in fines. The court session began with an impassioned speech by North Attorney Brendan Sullivan. He recounted North's personal heroism and pleaded for mercy and leniency. It's a time for forgiveness. Prosecutor John Kecker argued that the probationary sentence would diminish the seriousness of North's crimes. Then Oliver North, his voice breaking. I devoted nearly 2 decades in service of this country. I would never do anything to hurt it or its institutions. I have made many mistakes. I have committed serious crimes. I grieve for what has happened. The final word came from Judge Gerhard Gesell. He praised North's military leadership, but continued, your indictment involves your participation as a really low-ranking subordinate working to carry out initiatives of a few cynical superiors. The judge told North, I believe you still lack full understanding of how the public service has been tarnished, but added, jail will only harden your misconceptions. Your punishment will not include jail.
So happy I can hardly talk. I've been praying for this, thank God.
I think he got away with a little bit like murder. I think he got away kind of. He got away with something.
And the Democratic chairman of the House Iran-Contra Committee.
I think most members of Congress, myself included, would not really feel comfortable seeing Colonel North go behind prison bars.
Judge Gesell never named those cynical superiors allegedly directing North, but the sentence may reflect North's claims that he acted under orders from the late CIA Director William Casey, 2 former national security advisors, and through them, former President Ronald Reagan.
Reading Gesell's mind, he could have thought that North was under instructions to keep secret his various activities.
Prosecutors issued only a terse comment. Sentence is a matter for the judgment of the trial judge. North indicated he'll appeal the verdict, but may fulfill the community service part of his sentence.
I welcome the chance to work with these folks and anybody in the fight against drugs.
So, a year and 4 months after his indictment, Oliver North tonight retains his liberty, Connie.
Rita, was this a surprise? After all, he had been convicted on 3 felony counts.
I think the courtroom was stunned. Lawyers all over town had reminded us that Judge Gesell had given some very stiff sentences to some people who were convicted in the Watergate scandal. On the other hand, those were principles. Oliver North was not, in the judge's mind, apparently a principal in this, and that may have been what turned this.
All right, thank you, Rita Braver. No comment from President Bush on the North sentencing today, nor was there any public indication that the president discussed granting North a pardon. As White House correspondent Leslie Stahl reports, there seemed to be no need. Leslie?
Connie, they breathed a collective sigh of relief here this morning. White House and Republican Party officials say the pressure is off George Bush to pardon Oliver North. In fact, one aide said there's a growing Republican consensus that to pardon him now when there's no jail sentence would be, quote, a foolish mistake.
Before the sentencing, 58 members of Congress, mostly die-hard North supporters expecting a jail term, gave reporters copies of a letter to the president demanding a pardon. After the sentence, they decided not to mail it.
I wish I had known that the sentence would be more thoughtful and creative than I expected. I probably would have withheld the press release.
The Oliver North trial turned the spotlight back on the old "what did George Bush know" issue. New documents released at the trial raised the question of whether he participated in giving aid to Honduras in exchange for help for the Contra rebels.
Honduras, there was no quid pro quo.
Relief at the White House over the North sentence could give way to concern over the next trial of John Poindexter, Reagan's national security advisor.
I think that we will learn more about the Iran-Contra affair in the Poindexter trial. It is very possible that we will find out exactly where it all started and if indeed it was connected with the Oval Office itself.
At Poindexter's trial, the special prosecutor could have a star witness, Oliver North. He will probably be given immunity from any future charges to testify before the grand jury and at the trial.
He'll have an opportunity to tell the rest of his story, and we'll find out more about what Judge Gazelle referred to as those higher-ups that apparently were involved.
The White House strategy has been and will be to do whatever it takes to get the Iran-Contra issue off the front pages, to have it disappear. And that's why there was no comment today on the North sentence, and officials say not to expect one anytime soon. Connie?
Leslie, thank you. Oliver North is a retired Marine lieutenant colonel and therefore entitled to a Navy pension. CBS News Pentagon correspondent David Martin is with us in Washington now. David, what happens to North's retirement pay now that he's been sentenced?
Well, Connie, North has been receiving $23,000 a year in retirement pay, but one of the counts he was sentenced for today states that he shall, quote, forfeit his office. Now, if you interpret the word office to mean being a retired lieutenant colonel, then North would also have to forfeit his retirement pay. But the Navy has produced some legal opinions saying that is not what the law intended by the use of the word office, and that his retirement pay should not be affected. However, the Navy has passed the buck for a final decision to the Comptroller General of the United States, one of whose functions is to resolve disputes between individuals and the government. Pending a final decision by the Comptroller, the Navy is suspending North's retirement pay. But North was not expected to get another check until the end of this month. So if the Comptroller General acts fairly quickly, and if he agrees with the Navy's interpretation of the law, then North should not miss any paychecks.
David, is North's sentence liable to cause him any other difficulties?
Well, that same statute also says, quote, he shall be disqualified from holding any office under the United States. Now, that would seem to rule out running for elected office, which is something a lot of people have seen in North's future. So unless he can overturn this conviction on this count, any plans North might have had for a political career would seem to be dead.
Thank you. David Martin at the Pentagon. Still to come on the CBS Evening News, Betsy Aaron on the argument against one of the country's most common operations. And Doug Tennell on the failure of fooling with Mother Nature in the Everglades. Poland's new parliament was supposed to elect a president this week, but Communist Party leaders have been unable to choose a nominee, and today they postponed the vote at least until next week. This means, in effect, that Poland will have no head of state to greet President Bush when he arrives there on Sunday. In Paris today, Mikhail Gorbachev joined French President Mitterrand in calling for new steps to end the civil war in Lebanon. As Barry Peterson reports, it was part of Gorbachev's effort to find common ground with the West, and part of his public image battle with President Bush in the European theater.
Mikhail Gorbachev, the master politician, turned a stroll into a media event today, and the man who enjoys making dramatic political offers accused the Americans of making statements just to score propaganda points. At issue during a press conference tonight, President Bush's call for all Soviet troops to be withdrawn from Poland. I think Bush has to respond first to some of our proposals, said Gorbachev, adding, we want to pay as little attention as necessary to these propaganda-type initiatives. He offered a rare insight into his feelings about Ronald Reagan. The former president often adopted a condescending approach, said Gorbachev, but when the Soviets responded, Mr. Reagan was ready to work out a deal. The Soviet leader has found France friendly but not overwhelmed. No Gorbimania here.
I think French public opinion see Gorbachev as a nice man, as a very good man, but at the same time they see him as a man in a very shaken position.
He was asked today what would happen if he was no longer in charge of the Soviet Union. Perestroika would go on, he promised, and then asked the reporter, do you know something about Gorbachev that I don't know? In fact, Gorbachev's popularity back home is falling.
Here, he is not so popular as in the West.
Gorbachev can't trade foreign policy success for Soviet patience.
Our shops is empty and some other things. He talks too much, talk, and only talks, no action.
But as he has in other cities, Gorbachev signed a series of treaties for economic cooperation that he hopes will boost the Soviet economy in the years ahead. Gorbachev has won new support here. for Soviet participation in what he calls a common European home, a vision of Europe less dependent on America, more friendly with the Soviet Union. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Paris.
Andrei Gromyko, the former foreign minister and president who was eased out of power by Gorbachev, was buried today in Moscow. Gromyko died Sunday at the age of 79. He was foreign minister for 26 years under 5 Soviet leaders. But today, only one member of the Politburo came to his funeral. Israeli Prime Minister Shamir won approval for his right-wing coalition today for his election plan in the occupied Arab territories. However, he had to add strict conditions to the U.S.-backed plan under pressure from the party's hardliners. Martha Teichner reports.
Israel's Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir avoided a public humiliation over his plan for Palestinian elections, intended as a starting point for negotiating the final status of the occupied territories. But he paid a high price. In order to get his party to vote for it, Shamir had to endorse a list of explicit limitations dictated by his right-wing challengers. The conditions appear to preclude any negotiations with the Palestinians. The architect and undeclared winner of the nasty party infight was Cabinet Minister Ariel Sharon.
Now everyone understands where are the limits, and within the limits, everyone understands what can be done.
Since May 14th, the day the election plan was formally approved by the government, Sharon has been spoiling for this fight. From the very beginning, his intention was to kill the plan, no matter what the cost to his party. Sharon has carefully cultivated the role of cheerleader to militant right-wing Israelis, particularly Jewish settlers in the occupied territories. They don't want their homes to end up part of a Palestinian state. Their fear that Shamir's election plan is the first step in a sellout. At the funeral last month of a settler killed by an Arab, Shamir was booed and called a traitor. Sharon was the hero. The conditions he forced Shamir to accept were a litany of no's. No negotiations until the Intifada is crushed. No Palestinian state. No vote for East Jerusalem Arabs. And no end to Jewish settlements. Palestinians have been pushing for yeses on these issues.
I don't think I have destroyed the peace initiative. The peace initiative is alive.
But for how long? Shamir's surrender to the hardliners has put his fragile coalition government in danger of falling. And it has certainly made the job of mediating an Arab-Israeli peace harder for the United States. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
15 sailors from a Soviet fishing crew were wounded by a bomb in Peru today. The bomb exploded under a bus in Lima while the sailors were on a shopping trip. Police said they suspected the radical Shining Path guerrillas. The Soviet Union recently supplied helicopters to the Peruvian government to help in its fight against the guerrillas. China has been trying to get tourists to come back to Beijing, saying the capital has returned to normal since the massacre in Tiananmen Square a month ago. But today, when some Japanese tourists took pictures of the square, soldiers with assault rifles boarded their bus and confiscated the film. 2 of the tourists were taken to Army headquarters and detained for half an hour, but no one was hurt, and the Japanese embassy did not file a protest. A report out today confirms the continuing baby boom for older American women. The number of women having their first babies after age 30 has quadrupled in the last 16 years. The report says these new mothers are better educated, seek prenatal care earlier, and have fewer underweight babies. Hysterectomy is the second most frequently performed surgery in this country. For decades, it was portrayed as a routine operation. Now there are studies showing that it can have serious consequences on body and brain. And now correspondent Betsy Aaron reports women are challenging the old beliefs. Women are finding alternative treatments.
Darlene Aaliyah had always wanted to have children. At the age of 30, she had a hysterectomy. She now knows she didn't need the operation.
I was castrated, and I was totally devastated. I trusted this doctor that performed the surgery on me.
Right, all that tissue is the parametrium.
1 out of every 3 women who reached the age of 60 has had a hysterectomy, had her uterus and possibly her ovaries removed. Almost half of those operations were performed on women of childbearing age. But attitudes are changing. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has admitted that 1/3 of all hysterectomies are unnecessary.
Have you undergone a hysterectomy?
The Hysterectomy Educational Resource and Services Foundation, HERS, counsels women, providing many of them with names of doctors for second opinions.
14,000 women who had been told they absolutely had to have hysterectomies were told by the second opinion physician they in fact did not need a hysterectomy.
I would say 90% of the time that women seeking for a second opinion, that I say that there is another alternative.
There's lots of little fibroids, big ones, little ones.
Fibroid tumors are the most common reason for hysterectomies, but those tumors can be removed without removing the uterus.
Okay, let's have laser on.
The procedure is called a myomectomy. Simple exercise could have corrected Rosemary Padula's pelvic problem, but she found that out after she'd had her hysterectomy. Her doctor did not spell out alternatives, did not warn about possible after effects.
He said that I would have a great life and that I would have a terrific sex life, you know, and he painted a very, very rosy picture of how things would be without a uterus.
The facts were different.
I'm a person that has pain from morning till night. I suffer from, you know, terrible bouts of depression.
Complaints like these are heard every day on the HERS telephone.
The loss of sexual feeling, the profound fatigue, the loss of self-esteem, the feeling of not being competent, loss of short-term memory. I hear that all day, every day.
If there are so many complaints about hysterectomies, why are so many operations performed? From an attorney, a suspicion.
Hysterectomies really are the gold mine of American medicine. They generate $800 million a year in gynecological fees.
And then there is the subject of the uterus and whether it is a disposable part of the body. Doctors do not agree.
The uterus really has no functionability other than to bear children.
We, as physicians, can't just remove organs and pretend that we know so much that we can say it does nothing to remove it.
There was a time when it seemed as if almost all women of a certain age had a hysterectomy. For their daughters, the world could be a very different place. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, New York.
San Francisco today became the first major U.S. city to issue domestic partner certificates, allowing unmarried couples to claim certain rights, such as bereavement leave and hospital visitation rights. It didn't go off without a hitch, though. Unmarried couples lining up to get the certificates couldn't get them. They were still at the printers. A federal judge in Columbus today postponed action on the Pete Rose gambling case 2 weeks while the judge studies the controversy. Rose, manager of the Cincinnati Reds, is fighting to keep the lawsuit in state court, while baseball lawyers want the case moved to federal jurisdiction. In Abington, Virginia today, a federal judge fined the United Mine Workers and 2 union officials an additional $720,000 for violating his ban on forming convoys to slow down coal delivery trucks. Fines already have been assessed against the union for causing traffic jams in its 4-month strike against Pittston Coal Group.
What's in the spoon?
100% natural.
Better get a grip. It takes 16 spoons to equal the vitamin and mineral nutrition in just 1 spoon of Total.
That's a mouthful. More than a mouthful.
Spoon for spoon, Total has more nutrition than...
Windy weather is still fueling forest and brush fires out west today. Some of the worst are in Utah, including blazes keeping 250 firefighters busy in the Ashley National Forest. Lightning has touched off 7 forest fires in northeastern Utah alone. Heavy rains pounded much of the East Coast today. More than 8 inches of rain fell in parts of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, causing moderate to severe flooding along the Delaware River and its tributaries. Many roads were impassable because of the deluge, and flash flood warnings were posted for 13 of New Jersey's 21 counties. There's been some grumbling in the Northeast about the heavy rains this spring and early summer, but in the Southeast, rains have brought relief to a kind of wilderness unique in the United States. Even so, Doug Tennell reports the Everglades are under siege from man and nature.
The rain has finally returned to Florida's Everglades. Weathermen believe recent torrential downpours may mark the end of one of the worst droughts of this century. But for much of the wildlife here, the rains have come too late. 95% of the fish that are the backbone of the food chain have perished. Sloughs that are normally the feeding ground of some of the most elegant water birds in North America are barren. Nests are deserted.
I've been working in the southern Everglades area for 25 years, and I've never seen anything quite this dry.
For biologist John Ogden, the real danger of this drought is that it comes on top of some serious blunders in the way man has managed the flow of water into these wetlands.
Every year there seems to be something that's not right. We either have too much, we have too little, it's in the wrong place, it's delivered at the wrong times.
Last year, water managers poured so much water through the Everglades canal system that 50% of the season's alligator hatch drowned in the nest. This year, the few remaining water holes are jammed with normally solitary alligators, constantly fighting over food, some showing signs of serious malnutrition.
Man has been trying to control the flow of water to the Everglades long before the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built this dam 25 years ago. But what this drought has done has exposed what a complete failure most of those efforts have been.
We're changing the rules of the game. We're changing the playing field on which the wildlife and wildlands have come to depend.
The drought produced some of the worst fires in the Everglades in years. 48,000 acres burned last month, shortly after Congress began studying a plan to add most of this land to Everglades National Park. Investigators believe it was arson. Some say it was a protest by local developers or hunters that changed nature's rules in this part of the Everglades for decades to come.
It looks like the Everglades. It's not the Everglades of old. It's so changed. The park is dying. Biologically, it's dying, and it's a cumulative process that's going on over many years now.
This year brought the most silent spring so far. Doug Tennell, CBS News, in the Everglades.
And that's the CBS Evening News.
That eagle.